Most people think wealth begins when you buy the right investment. That is where they go wrong. They think the secret is the stock, the rental property, the crypto chart, the private deal, the one hot thing they hope will pull them across the line faster than ordinary life has been able to do. I have spent most of my life around capital, and I can tell you something that is both less glamorous and more useful. Wealth does not come from buying the right thing first. It comes from buying the right things in the right order. That is the part almost nobody explains properly. The public is always shown the last move. Buy the index fund, buy the duplex, buy the business, buy the stock, buy the asset. But if you force those steps too early, you get the wrong result. Your investments stay too small to matter. Your risks stay too large. Your cash flow stays too weak. Your life stays so crowded with maintenance that every plan for the future gets interrupted by the present. Then people say investing does not work. Often the problem is not the investment. The problem is the order. I want to talk about order. Not because it sounds elegant, because order is one of the great hidden sources of wealth. A person can make a series of reasonable-looking financial decisions and still remain stuck for years if he makes them in the wrong sequence. Another person can take almost the same tools, use them in a better order, and find that each step makes the next one easier. That is what I want for you. I do not want you buying assets before you are ready to feed them. I do not want you looking at passive income before you have built active capacity. I do not want you fantasizing about compounding while your life is still too chaotic to contribute consistently. And I certainly do not want you measuring progress by appearance instead of structure. Let me say this plainly. Most people stay poor longer than they need to, not because they never try, but because they keep trying to skip the boring layers. They want the final stage first. They want ownership without surplus. They want investing without capacity. They want freedom while still living inside a machine that consumes every spare hour and every spare dollar. That is not how this works. The first purchase in a wealthy life is not an asset. It is time. That sentence surprises people because they are used to hearing poor people should save more money. Middle class people should buy appreciating assets and rich people should diversify. Fine, there is some truth there. But before any of that works, you need something more primitive. You need hours that belong to you. I have always believed time is the first real leverage, not free time in the lazy sense, not idle time. I mean usable time, directed time, uninterrupted time. Time that can be aimed at building rather than merely recovering. Most people do not realize how poor they are in this category. They imagine they are short on money. Very often they are short on attention first. They wake up, go to work, commute, answer messages, deal with errands, buy groceries, pay bills, solve minor fires, stare at screens, and then tell themselves they are too tired to build a future. I understand the feeling. I am not mocking it. I am saying that if your life leaves you no clean stretch in which to improve your earning power or build something scalable, then the first thing you must buy is not a stock, it is room. This is why I take small operational decisions so seriously. Meal prep matters, automated bill pay matters. Grocery delivery can matter. Batching errands matters. Deleting time, wasting apps matters. Turning off non-essential notifications matters. Simplifying the household matters. Outsourcing some low-value friction can matter. People often call these wastes of money. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they are among the highest return purchases available because every hour you recover from maintenance can later be converted into skill, output, cash flow, or ownership. That is a very different return profile from buying another object that simply asks for more maintenance tomorrow. I would rather have an extra 10 hours a week to direct intelligently than an extra expensive toy that makes me feel successful while consuming my time. Time is the first leverage because it multiplies everything else. An hour spent tired and fragmented has one kind of output. An hour spent focused and directed has another. Multiply that difference across a year, then across several years, and you begin seeing why some people seem to accelerate while others remain trapped in loops that feel strangely permanent. The trapped person is always busy. Busy is not the same as building. I want you to notice that difference. The person who finds 10 or 15 usable hours a week to invest into his future is operating with an advantage. The public keeps underestimating. He may still feel ordinary fine. He is no longer entirely trapped in maintenance mode. That is the first escape hatch. Now comes the second purchase, a high-income skill. This is the step almost everybody wants to glide past because it is not exciting enough to satisfy the ego. They want to think the real game begins in the market. Number investing does not create wealth out of nothing. It multiplies what already exists. If there is very little to multiply, then all the magical language around compounding will only frustrate you. 10% on $1,000 is still not the sort of number that changes a life. A tiny portfolio can be mathematically healthy and emotionally disappointing at the same time. That is why the second purchase is not ownership, it is earning power. A high-income skill changes what an hour of your life is worth. That matters more than most people admit, because the early years of wealth building are not usually an investing problem. They are a surplus problem. If your life never produces meaningful surplus, then there is nothing serious to deploy into assets. You remain in the land of tiny numbers, tiny contributions, tiny compounding. Tiny mistakes that still feel big because the whole structure is small. That is exhausting. The answer is not to become more optimistic about a small base. The answer is to increase the base. And that is what a high-income skill does. I do not care very much for vague discussions about passion here. Passion is overrated. It is pleasant when it appears. But it is not a financial model. I care about three qualities. The skill must be tied closely to revenue. The skill must scale better than pure hours. And the skill must live where demand is durable. That is why I have so much respect for skills close to money. Sales, client acquisition, negotiation, performance marketing. Copy that moves, buyer systems that reduce major cost, distribution, deal making. Anything that helps revenue come in or expensive waste go out is usually valued more highly than elegant background competence the market has decided to underprice. This is not always fair. It is still true. The person who gets close to revenue gets close to leverage. The person who remains too far from it is often paid for reliability, not for impact. Reliability is useful. Impact is usually better rewarded. This is why the public gets caught in what I think of as the small numbers trap. It tries to invest before it has earned enough to make the investing emotionally visible. A person making average money with high fixed costs and trying to build a portfolio with little scraps of surplus is doing something honorable, and I would never mock him for beginning. But I do want him to see the truth clearly. The faster way is often not a better stock. It is a stronger skill. If a person can take himself from earning $25 an hour in effect to $50 or $75 or more in effect, or from an average salary to a much higher one in a field with more leverage, the entire future changes, not because he is suddenly rich, because the monthly surplus becomes large enough to fund real accumulation. That is the difference. Not intelligence, scale of surplus. And this is why I would happily spend money buying a high-income skill courses if they are real tools, software books, a better workstation, direct practice, mentorship, apprenticeship, any legitimate way of compressing the time between where your skill is and where the market will pay you much more for it. That can be one of the highest return purchases in existence. People do this naturally in some domains and not in others. A young lawyer understands that paying for education to increase future earning power may be worthwhile. A salesperson may understand the value of training that lifts conversion. A programmer may understand the value of tools. Yet the same people will spend thousands on visible lifestyle upgrades, while hesitating to spend a fraction of that on something that raises future earning power for years. That is backward. I want you to buy the thing that increases your future output before you buy the thing that merely increases your current image. That is how adults build. Now let us assume you have bought back some time and increased your ability to earn. A strange thing happens at this point. Many competent people remain poor because nobody knows they exist. This is where the third purchase matters. Distribution. There are two kinds of invisible people, those with no real skill and those with real skill but no flow of attention. The second group is one of the most tragic in modern work because they are often good enough to create real value and not visible enough to command what that value deserves. In the real world, talent alone is not rewarded. Access is rewarded, discovery is rewarded, trust is rewarded, distribution is how those things happen repeatedly instead of by accident. Now, when I say distribution, I do not mean vanity. I do not mean posting photos of your breakfast and calling it personal branding. I mean a reliable system by which the right people can find you. Understand what you do. Trust that you can solve something expensive or painful for them and contact you without your having to scratch for every opportunity from zero every day. That can take many forms: a newsletter, a YouTube channel, a built website, search traffic, paid ads with discipline behind them, a network with actual substance, a body of work that keeps attracting the right people, a reputation inside a specific industry. Distribution is any repeatable system that brings opportunities toward you. That matters because without distribution, even a good skill stays priced like a commodity. You take what is offered because you do not know when the next buyer will appear. Once you have distribution, the psychology changes. You can choose better clients, raise prices, decline bad work, control your own time more intelligently. That is not a minor benefit. It shifts you from dependence toward position. Position is worth a lot in finance. The average person spends years trying to negotiate his way out of being underpaid while remaining structurally invisible. That is hard. The person with skill plus distribution has a very different conversation with the market. He does not need every deal. That alone makes him stronger. This is also where people begin moving away from the labor economy in a meaningful way. Because once opportunities find you with some regularity, you begin seeing patterns. Which clients are profitable? Which problems show up again and again? Which part of your work can be standardized? Which piece is scalable? Which service can become a productized offer? Which offer can become an agency? Which agency can become a small machine? That is how the fourth purchase appears, a cash flow machine. This is the place where most people think the story begins. They are wrong. The cash flow machine is not the first step. It is what becomes possible. After time, skill, and distribution have been built well enough, if you force it too early, you often build a bad machine with weak economics because the earlier layers are missing. A cash flow machine is simply a system that turns effort into repeatable income in a way that is more stable than freelancing hand to mouth and more leverage than hourly work. It may be a productized service, a small agency, a software tool, a media business, a digital product, a newsletter with sponsorship, and offers a niche consulting machine. A real small business with actual local demand. I care much less about the wrapper than about the underlying rule. The system must be predictable enough to throw off surplus. That is the whole point. Once you have predictable surplus, the game changes again. This is why I like monthly recurring revenue, not because it sounds fashionable, because predictability makes planning possible. Planning makes scaling possible. Scaling makes ownership more powerful. When money arrives randomly, fear stays high. Fear makes bad decisions. A cash flow machine with recurring or at least reasonably predictable inflow creates the opposite emotion. Not peace exactly, but room to hire, room to save, room to invest, room to survive a bad month. That room matters more than the public realizes. Most people live too close to the edge to take advantage of real opportunities. They are not stupid. They are compressed. The machine is what reduces the compression. But I want to say something harsh here because it matters. Not every business is a cash flow machine. Many are just chaos with a logo. A real cash flow machine must be stable, repeatable, understandable, and not excessively dependent on your constant emotional rescue. If every month feels like survival, you do not yet have the machine. You have a collection of revenue events. Those can still be useful. They are not yet the same thing. The goal is surplus, real surplus. The money left after life is paid for. That is the fuel that makes the final stage possible. And now finally, we arrive at the purchase most people try to start with. Ownership. This is where rich people live. Not because they never work. Many work ferociously. But because ownership lets them collect value from the economy in ways labor alone never can. When companies grow, owners benefit. When prices rise and businesses have pricing power. Owners benefit when rents rise and real estate is productive. Owners benefit when the broad market rises because productive enterprise grows over time. Owners benefit inflation squeezes workers faster than owners. That is not a slogan. It is structural. The worker experiences the price increase directly first. The owner often experiences it through asset repricing, higher nominal revenues, and the simple fact that productive claims on the economy behave differently from wages. This is why I care so much about getting people to the ownership stage properly. Not because investing is glamorous, because it is the point where your life stops depending entirely on your labor. But the order matters. If you try to begin here without building time, skill, distribution, and surplus first, the ownership stage stays too small, tiny monthly contributions, tiny investments, tiny compounding, tiny mistakes that still hurt. Then you get frustrated and think the market betrayed you. Number you just entered too early with too little fuel. Once the machine throws off real surplus, ownership finally works the way the books described it. Now you can buy broad market index funds and let the whole productive economy work for you. Now you can buy real estate if the math is honest and the cash flow is real. Now you can buy or start buying pieces of businesses. Now you can step into higher forms of ownership. The stack usually begins with broad, low-cost index ownership because it is simple, diversified, and powerful enough for most people if respected long enough. Then, for some, it expands into real estate or direct business equity. For the strongest operators, it becomes acquiring or owning whole machines. But the sequence matters because the risk changes at each stage. Broad indexing is a good first layer because you are buying the system itself. Real estate can be a powerful second layer if the numbers truly work. Business equity offers more upside and more danger. Buying whole businesses is the strongest and hardest form because now you are not just owning a claim, you are controlling the engine. But none of this works beautifully if you do not have surplus feeding the system. That is what the public keeps trying not to hear. There is another thing I want you to understand. Every one of these steps is trying to teach you the same lesson. Move from maintenance to leverage. That is what wealth is. Poor people often use money to buy status because status gives the illusion of escape. Middle class people often use money to buy comfort because comfort feels like success after years of pressure. Rich people, when they stay rich, use money to buy leverage. That is why the sequence begins with time. Time is leverage, then skill is leverage, then distribution, that is leverage, then a cash flow machine, that is leverage, then ownership, that is where leverage compounds. If you look at wealth through that lens, a great deal becomes obvious. You stop admiring things that make a life look more successful while actually increasing fragility. You stop buying liabilities just because the culture calls them milestones. You stop trying to leap to the final chapter while the earlier pages are still blank. The hardest part for most people is not understanding the logic. It is accepting that the order denies the ego for a while. It says, no, you do not get to feel rich yet. No, you do not get the flashy investment before you have built the engine that feeds it. No, you do not get to pretend a tiny portfolio changes the game. No, you do not get to buy the symbols before you have built the structure. That is hard. It is also why it works. Because wealth is not only an economic challenge, it is an ego challenge. People sabotage their own sequence because they want the reward signals early. They want visible proof. They want the identity before they have built the machine that can support the identity. Honestly, that is where years disappear. I would rather you look slightly behind for a while and become structurally stronger than look slightly ahead and remain soft underneath. This is why I admire boring people in money. They follow the sequence, they get their time back, they build the skill, they become visible enough to command value. They turn the skill and attention into a cash flow machine. Then they use the surplus to buy ownership with seriousness. Later the public calls them lucky. Fine. The public has poor eyesight. Now, I want to end with the most important test. Look at your life and be brutally honest. Where are you actually in the sequence? Not where you wish to be. Not what you tell people at dinner. Where are you? Are you still buying time because your life is too fragmented to build? Are you in the skill stage trying to raise the value of an hour? Are you competent but still invisible? Which means distribution is the next unlock. Have you built enough time, skill, and attention that a cash flow machine can now exist? Or are you finally at the ownership stage where the main question becomes how to allocate surplus intelligently and patiently? There is no shame in any stage. The shame is in lying about the stage and then making decisions appropriate to a later chapter. That is how people get stuck. The right order makes each layer fund and strengthen the next time, gives you room for skill. Skill gives you surplus potential. Distribution improves the pricing of skill. Cash flow machines turn skill and distribution into repeatable surplus. Ownership turns surplus into compounding independence. That is the ladder. And if you climb it in order, you do not need magic. You need clarity. That is much better. Magic makes people passive. Clarity gives them work they can actually do. That is what I prefer, always.